few times now, and they're usually similarly themed, so this one should come as no surprise. All right, so the project this time, and I guess the title of this project is Hacking Mixed Reality Controllers, so I'm sure you can imagine what's inside of here that you'll see in just a moment. The goal was to build a VR trackable device. This is for a new project slash company slash something that I'm working on that's doing immersive data visualization, so being able to step inside your data and explore it with virtual reality, for example, and eventually augmented reality. So in terms of adding custom, homemade, trackable devices, the Vive is probably winning that right now. I'm not even sure if it's possible with the Oculus. I don't think they've open sourced any of that. So these are some of the examples of devices. That one looks a little Street Fighter-y right there. So that's kind of how people typically approach this. However, I wanted to use Windows headsets, primarily because of inside-out tracking. So this is what a motion controller looks like. This is what the Windows version looks like. These are also, by the way, extremely affordable. So I'm going to pass this controller around so you can get an idea if you haven't seen one of these yet. It's kind of like a really cheap version of the Vive wand, but it works. So like I said, inside-out tracking. Who knows what inside-out tracking is? Okay, so inside-out tracking, for those of you who don't know, means you don't need to set up anything in the room. You can literally just put the thing on, and it'll use optical recognition, kind of like how Snapchat does it. And it's able to do that 3D tracking with just a smartphone camera. So that's one of the big, I guess, advocations for the Windows system, is that they're able to bring that like HoloLens tech onto a headset that costs $200 at a retail price, including the controllers. Very cheap, probably will only get cheaper. And obviously, with this being more of an enterprise data play, that ecosystem is strategic. It also has really, really low minimum requirements. So you're talking about my basically mobile, ultra mobile processor, Y-class processor on a fanless laptop is able to run it. A Windows mixed reality VR experience, no GPU, nothing, and probably the crappiest integrated GPU they have. And it's able to run the experience. So that is important from just supporting a lot of different devices. And then it's a path to AR, which is our ultimate goal. The controllers themselves are really cheap. So that you're looking at probably a street price of like $30 for that individual controller. So we took the controller, or I should say I took the controller, and I had to figure out how am I going to make this, and made it with my custom device, which is about the shape of a little mixing deck. And that's a custom device, wireless Bluetooth communication to the computer, and I need to be able to see it in VR. And that's a little bit trickier than it seems. So started to take apart this thing. It has a case, couple screws on there, and then it pries apart roughly. It's cheap plastic, no offense to them, but they did a poor job with that. Okay, so I was prying, couldn't figure out there was one more screw, so I just snapped it right off. It wasn't ever going to go back together anyway. So then this part came apart. This is the main board. This is like a little daughter board over there. That's where the joystick and the touch pad, the little direction pad that actually has a capacitive sensor on it as well, so it can detect where on the pad you are. Of course, I don't need any of that, so we tore that off. And the main board itself it had positions, as you can see, when you pass that thing around, if you want to pop off the battery plate and pop out the batteries or whatever, that has positions for 2 AA batteries, which means probably about 3 volts or close enough. So I'm thinking, obviously, I don't need to put the batteries into this device, or I can run them off of the actual custom device. So the idea was to use maybe tap and use a regulator to feed it whatever voltage it wanted. Or maybe even integrate a tiny little LiPo with a USB recharger or something like that, just to be able to power this little, what it ends up being, without having to carry around AA batteries. So this is a bench test with the AA batteries and the thing disassembled. And surprisingly, it actually kind of worked. But the components that we didn't really need, this joystick and the board, the touchpad and the housing, I literally just cut them right off. And then that was the thing that I used to cut them off. It actually worked amazingly well. It's like $2 on eBay. Best wire cutter ever, very comfortable grips. anyway, so tore it apart. That's essentially what we had left. And so I'm going to pass around this little device, which is the final device as it is created and rehoused. And this has a battery pack stuck on it, but obviously with the final device, we just wire it in to the deck. So this is what the main board looks like. I don't really know what I'm looking at other than a bunch of components and then some little black box over there that probably has some code running. This switch right there is for turning it on, pressing and holding. That equates to the Windows button. And then there's a switch on the other side that's for activating the Bluetooth pairing. So this is where I cut off the joystick, and then that's where I had to wire a little jumper for the power supply to ultimately connect in. So bench testing it now that everything's cut off and now it's just down to the bare bones, bench testing it. Okay, there's a ton of drift. There's a lot of lag. It does not work very well, but there's potential. It does show up in VR. We can see it. And if it's not moving very much, then it works great. But it's really, when you start to rotate it or pick it up, it just sort of floats away into the ether and then just disappears and then comes back. And so it really is not working very well. So I realized that we had to kind of go back maybe. The Bluetooth pairing wasn't working for some reason, so we couldn't pair it to a new device. Nothing really fit together. The controller seemed to be stuck moving to the right, and ultimately figured out that Windows, whatever driver subsystem it's using, is actually kind of smart. So it was detecting the absence of certain sensors and then making the whole thing, oh, no, this must have out of bounds values because these things are not present. And so it was basically instantly disconnecting the device, which was massively frustrating. So ended up repackaging it all with the pieces still intact, sort of reassembling it. That's what's being passed around. And after all of that, it still didn't work. So I switched it over to the other controller that comes with two controllers. So I basically threw away the one I had hacked to pieces and then switched to the other one and put it all back together, troubleshoot it, and then it still didn't work, and then I gave up. So this is an example of a failed project where we got 95% of the way through and just threw it out the window. So the end goal now is to just take like that brand new looking controller and I'm just going to epoxy it onto the custom deck device, and that's it. Nice. So problem solved with super glue. Thank you. And then this is what remained after the project, so you can mock it. Goes on the. It's all there, so I don't know what all there is. I tried to find patents with no luck. I mean, I didn't try very hard, but I Googled it once, and I couldn't find any patents. Nobody had disassembled these things for some reason. They disassembled the headsets, but nobody had disassembled the controllers and figured out what all the things are. So, yeah.
Did you try it with this before dismantling it?
Yeah, for sure. It worked great when it's just like that. It works beautiful. Exactly. No, I tested that. I wasn't, yeah, exactly. So, and that on its own works great. And then as soon as you remove a piece of plastic from it, it goes insane. And I don't know how it knows. It's possessed, but I'm not dealing with it. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I did many times, yeah. Yeah, six degrees of freedom, all the everywhere except. So because it's inside-out tracking and it's camera-based, it's looking for that little ring of LEDs, and then it's, I believe, compensating somehow with accelerometer and maybe other sensors. So once it comes out of view, then it's only using the accelerometer. So it feels like it's still there, and you can still point with it, but it's actually not tracking it. So it's kind of clever, yeah. So it'll. The camera is on the headset. So you put on the headset, two cameras, and then you have the wands all over the place. And as soon as they're out of view, and it's a pretty good field of view, but as soon as they're out, then because you can't really see them, obviously you can't see them in your peripheral, then they resort to just tracking position, like if you had a Gear VR.
That's really smart because the stuff that happens
it is quite smart.
Here is the stuff that you're yourself less aware of.
Yes, it's too smart for its own good, because when it, anyway.
The IMU, like the accelerometers, they move relative to the position of the lights in recreation.
So that was one of the first issues, was when I had initially bench tested it, I was just moving the ring, and the main board was sitting still, and so that was drifting all over the place like crazy. But then even when I put them together, it still didn't work.
Were they relative to each other probably? Like, were they in the exact
No,
position?
no.
Because there's probably sensor fusion going on, so it probably believes that these lights need to be, and this IMU is right here, the lights should be here, so if it's like here, it's going to be like
The orientation.
It's
data,
possible. It's possible. I mean, if you,
X, Y, and Z are set on that, but in your version, they're different.
I was hoping that it wouldn't be that clever. I was hoping that it would be a little dumber than that, because it is kind of flexible. It's not, again, this is not the best, finest plastic they have in use here. So it's got a lot of room movement. So I would be surprised if it was that clever and that like sensitive. You think so?
Yeah, there's no way it would work. They have to.
It wouldn't just recalibrate automatically? So that the,
why would they write that?
well, because the ring is just LEDs. Well,
Continued.
yeah, exactly. Thank you.